Hi guys, in today's video we are going to be looking at what is activity based costing or ABC. This topic is relevant to those who are doing paper PM or F5 from ACCA and paper P1 from CIMA. And I have your Kaplan textbook on my screen, but before we look at a question from the textbook, let me give you a small example to explain what is activity-based costing. And let's take a scenario where you make and sell tea. Okay. Suppose the selling price of one cup of tea is $100. Very expensive tea. And the costs involved in making this tea are, obviously you will have to buy milk, tea powder, you might want to put sugar. So you have material costs, which suppose are $5 per unit. Then you will have to pay the labor who is working in your shop to make the tea. Suppose you're paying him also $5 per cup of tea per unit. Then you will have the variable overheads, say another $5. And then you will have fixed overheads, right? Now, for those of you who are not comfortable with overheads, please let me know in the comments section. This video is dedicated to activity-based costing. So if you have a problem with overheads, let me know in the comments section. I will make a video on that. I had got a request to make a video on activity-based costing, so I will stick to activity-based costing in this video, right? So the fixed cost, one example of a fixed cost is rent, right? So making this tea and coffee in the shop, and suppose the rent per month of the shop is 10,000. What you need to do is you need to calculate what is the rent cost per unit, correct? Why do you want to know that? So that you can put it here and you can calculate the total cost per unit, right? So what you would do, one way of doing that is on the basis of number of units. What I mean is, what you will do is, okay, the rent is 10,000. Okay, we made 1,000 units this month. We made 1,000 cups of tea and coffee this month, right? 1,000 units were made. So therefore, the rent per unit, if the rent for 1,000 units was 10,000, then the rent for 1 unit is going to be 10. So it seems very sensible. Okay, the rent per unit is 10. So what you will do here, you will put 10 here and you will say the total cost is 25, and you will say the profit is, we were selling it for 100, right? And your total cost is 25. So your profit is 75 per unit, per piece, right? Everything seems great. One way of calculating the fixed cost per unit was on the basis of number of units. Seems very sensible. But now I want to give you a small example. Suppose you stay with your friends in this room and the rent of that room is 10,000 per month, right? So the rent is 10,000 per month. And suppose your first friend is using this much of the room. Your second friend is using this much space in the room. And your third friend is using this much space in the room. And your fourth friend is using this much space. That is you. This is you, right? This is how much space you're using in the room. Now you need to split the rent per person, just like how you split the fixed cost of rent per unit here. And how did you do that last time? Is on the basis of number of units. So we can apply that same idea here and say, okay, the rent is 10,000 per month. There are 4 people staying in the room, so 10,000 divided by 4 is 2,500. Right? Everyone should be happy, no one should have a problem. But are you happy? I don't think so. Why? Because you will say this is not fair. Correct? You're paying the same rent which your friend A is paying, and your friend A is using so much of the room. Correct? So you will say this is not fair, and this way of calculating the fixed cost of rent per unit is not appropriate, it is not fair. Right? You're saying that it is not fair. You're having a problem with it. You're saying it's not fair. Okay? So, what do? You're not happy. And now, that is where activity-based costing comes to help you. So now, let me show you what activity-based costing does. Here I'm putting activity-based costing. This is our traditional way of doing it. And this is the activity-based costing approach. We're doing the same scenario. We're looking at the same scenario. We make and sell tea, and the selling price is $100. Okay, the material cost is 5. It's the same thing. We're just copy-pasting. The labor cost is 5. Copy-paste. The variable overheads, 5, copy paste. But when you come to the fixed cost and when you want to calculate the fixed cost per unit, coming back to this example, you understand that this way of doing it was not very appropriate. You were not happy with this way, right? I hope you've understood why you're not happy with this way with the help of this example. What activity-based costing will do is they will try to calculate the fixed cost per unit in a more appropriate way. Right? So coming back to this example, what idea you come up with is, okay, the rent is 10,000 per month, fine. Instead of dividing it on the basis of number of people, what you say is, okay, rent is 10,000 per month, the area of the room is 1,000 square feet, okay, you have a big room. So you find out what was the rent per square feet. Okay, so the rent is 10,000 for 1,000 square feet. So the rent for 1 square feet is going to be 10. Right? And what you will do is A is using 60% of the room. That is 600 square feet. B is using 30% of the room. That is 300 square feet. C and D, that is your friend C and you, are using only 50 square feet each. Right? So what you will do is, since you have calculated the rent per square feet, what you will do is you will say, okay, A, since you are using 600 square feet and since the rent is 10 per square feet, you will say, okay, A, you pay 6,000 out of 10,000. B, same way. This is what you do. B is using 300 square feet. The rent is $10 per square feet. So you tell B, you pay 3,000. I will pay only 500. Why? Because I'm only using 50 square feet. The rent is 10 per square feet. So I'll only pay 500. C will also pay only 500. This is more fair. This is more appropriate. Correct? So now coming back to activity-based costing. Activity-based costing has the same idea. When you're calculating the fixed cost per unit, instead of doing it on the basis of number of units in a random way, what you will do is you will calculate it in a more fair way, right? What you will do is you will take the cost and divide that not by the number of units just randomly. You will divide it by its cost driver. What is the cost driver? As in, what is causing that cost? Like in this example, the square feet was the cost driver. The more the square feet, the more you had to pay. Right? So you're dividing it by the cost driver so that you're able to calculate a more fair and a more appropriate fixed cost per unit, and that is what you're doing here in activity-based costing. What you will do is, instead of just dividing it by the number of units, you will say, okay, fine, the rent is 10,000. My shop is 10,000 square feet. So the rent per square feet is $1. Right? I have it in front of you. What you're doing in activity-based costing is rent is 10,000. The shop area is 10,000 square feet. So you're dividing the rent by the square feet. So 10,000 by 10,000 is the rent per square feet is $1. And suppose, for example, the square feet used by 1 unit is 5 square feet. So therefore, if the fixed cost, the fixed cost for that 1 unit is going to be $1 is the cost per square feet. 5 square feet were used, so the fixed cost by that 1 unit is going to be 5. So here we will put 5, which is more appropriate and more fair. Therefore, you can say that the total cost was 20. And the profit, if the selling price was 100 and the total cost was 20, the profit per unit is 80. Right? And this is what activity-based costing is trying to do. We're trying to calculate or absorb. Those of you who are comfortable with overhead chapter will understand the word I'm using. But for everyone, generally, I'm using the word calculate. So you calculate or absorb the fixed overhead per unit in a more appropriate way, right? And that is what you do in activity-based costing, and that is it. If you've understood this much, you will be able to do activity-based costing sums, right? Before we leave, there are 2 other ways of calculating the fixed cost per unit according to the traditional method, not the activity-based costing method. One method I told you is on the basis of number of units. There are 2 other ways which you should be aware of from the overheads chapter, right? So those 2 ways are on the basis of machine hours and on the basis of number of units. Anyway, as I said, I'm not talking about this in this video. If you do not understand this, let me know in the comments section. It is a different chapter, which if required, I will do separately, right? So these are the 3 ways to calculate or absorb the fixed cost per unit according to the traditional way. But how is activity-based costing different? When you're calculating or absorbing the fixed overhead per unit, you're being more fair, you're being, you're dividing the cost not just randomly by the number of units or machine hours or labor hours, but by the cost driver, so that the cost that you're giving per unit is more appropriate. And I hope you understand what I mean by that when you remember this example, right? So that is all for this video. I'm going to make another part on activity based costing where we will look at a question from the textbook, right? Thank you very much. I will see you in the next video. Please make sure you watch that video as well.